Thank you for visiting Animal Encounters. Today I'm covering the most brutal cases of influencers who got too close to deadly animals. From a photographer who thought a wild bear had befriended him, to a man who camped right on a hippo's path in the dark. But first we begin off the coast of South Australia, where we join witness the last minutes of cage diving influencer Marnie Loxton. It was the 26th of March, 2017, and a gray swell rolled over the Neptune Islands off South Australia, above one of the great white shark's favorite hunting grounds. Marnie Loxton was 25, a dive and travel creator who had built her whole following on getting closer to animals than her viewers ever would. She had booked a cage dive at the Neptunes, the one place in Australia you can drop into a steel cage and watch great whites at sea. To bring the sharks in, the operators trail a slick of burley behind the boat, a soup of minced fish and tuna oil, and the islands themselves hold a huge fur seal colony, which is why the big whites patrol there. The cage footage, though, was the same footage everyone came home with, and Marnie wanted the shot no other creator had. She wanted to be outside the bars, free in the water, eye to eye. Every operator on that water lives by one rule, that you never leave the cage. And the reason cage diving at these islands has such a strong safety record is that, almost without exception, people follow the procedure. Divers who have done it properly will tell you the cage does two things at once. It is a barrier a great white seldom gets past, and it breaks up your outline so that from below you do not read as a seal-shaped meal. The instant Marnie left it, she gave up both at the same time. The whole appeal of a great white is that it is a near-perfect ambush hunter, and the one thing you must never hand it is open water and a slow, seal-sized shape to look at. She had swum with reef sharks for the camera before, and nurse sharks, and none of them had wanted her. And somewhere across all those safe, easy clips, the line between a shark that tolerates you and a shark that hunts you had quietly gone blurry in her mind. The rule on those boats is simple. You do not leave the cage, not ever. And I cannot stress enough how completely every part of me agrees with it. But unfortunately, Marnie had other plans. The burly slick was already spreading when a large female came gliding out of the gloom, easily 14 feet, perhaps a little more, unhurried, as large great whites often are. Marnie made her move in the lull just after it drifted off, when the water had emptied and no one expected a diver to try anything at all. She had done enough of these dives to know the cage and its catches, and in a few unwatched seconds she unclipped, pushed through the gap, and finned out into the open, camera up. The crew spotted her almost at once and were already shouting and reaching to haul her back in, but the burley had done its work, and the female had not gone far. A great white does not run its prey down in a straight race. It hangs back, drops beneath its target, and comes up fast and hard from below and behind, using the dark water and surface glare to hide its approach. From underneath, a person hanging at the surface reads as one thing only, the rounded silhouette of a seal, and Marnie had just placed that silhouette into the middle of a feeding ground. For a few seconds, it simply vanished. The way they do, and that is the worst part. The stillness, where the animal drops away into the blue and lines up its run. Then it came, a surge of water and weight from directly below, and by the time the crew understood what they were seeing at the surface, the sea had already closed over the moment. I have watched that clip more times than I should have, and the thing that absolutely terrifies me is how ordinary the water looks, right up until the instant it all goes wrong. The crew did everything right and everything fast, hauling her back toward the boat and working to keep the shark away with poles and engine thrust, but a single strike from an animal that size in open water leaves almost nothing for anyone to do. A great white will often bite once and withdraw, more test than fury. And against a seal, that one bite is usually enough. Against a person, it is far more than enough. From the footage that survived, investigators concluded she had likely intended only a brief moment outside the cage, a few seconds beyond the bars, one clean pass, and back in before anyone could stop her. The ocean does not run on anyone's plan. Despite onboard first aid and a hard run back toward the mainland, Marnie died from catastrophic blood loss before she could reach any real medical care. Investigators later concluded it was a great white attack on a diver who had left the cage against clear and repeated instruction, and the operator, whose safety record until that day had been exceptional, could only confirm what everyone aboard had seen. The clip was recovered from her camera but never released to the public, since her family would not allow it, and it survives only as a copy quietly passed between divers. The shark had not hunted her out of any malice. It had done exactly what the burley and the seals and 100 million years had shaped it to do, and she had lowered a seal-shaped shadow into the one patch of ocean where that was the most dangerous thing she could possibly possibly be. That was open water and a broken rule. Our next story crosses to the far side of the world into a drowned forest where the tigers have learned to hunt from the water. It was the 11th of December, 2014, and a cold mist sat over the tidal channels of the Sundarbans, the vast mangrove maze on the Bay of Bengal where the only swamp-dwelling tigers on Earth rule the mud and the water. Anirban Basak was 28, an adventure filmmaker from Kolkata who wanted the ultimate man-eater country video, so he hired a small boat and a boatman to take him deep into the tiger reserve. The Sundarbans tigers are unlike any others. They swim easily between the islands. They are strong and patient in a place where a person cannot run, and they almost always strike from behind, aiming for the neck or upper back. The people who work those forests know all of this in their bones. Honey collectors and fishermen have for years worn masks with a painted human face on the back of the head, hoping to fool a tiger that prefers to strike what it thinks cannot see it, a trick whose effectiveness has faded over the years as the tigers have learned. Forest guards wear stiff neck guards for the same reason. Nearly every village at the forest edge has its tiger widows, and the goddess Bon Bibi is prayed to before anyone goes in. What makes the Sundarbans tiger so feared is not its size, but its method. Generations of hunting people in a place with almost no cover for the prey have taught it that the surest kill is the one the victim never sees. So it studies a target from the green wall, waits for the back to turn, and spends its entire rush on the 1/2 second when no one is looking. Anirban, turning to face his own camera, handed it that half second exactly. The particular horror of that place is that you almost never see it coming. The mud is too soft to run in, the mangrove too thick to watch, and all a person can really do when it begins is shout. Those honey collectors have worn masks on the backs of their heads for years just to fool the tigers, and the fact that even eventually stopped working tells you everything I need to know about this animal. Against the boatman's advice and against the rules of the reserve, Anirban had the boat nosed in to a bank at low tide so he could film a fresh set of pug marks and get his own feet on man-eater ground. He climbed out illegally onto the mud, mask pushed up off the back of his head for the camera, and turned his back to the tree line to frame the shot. A Sundarbans tiger does not announce itself. There is no roar and no open charge across the ground. It comes low and silent out of the mangrove, the soft mud swallowing every sound, and it covers the last stretch in a rush that is over before the mind can catch up. From the tracks and the boatman's account, forest officials concluded it took him from behind at the edge of the trees, exactly the way the masks were invented to prevent. The boatman saw the shape break from the green wall and did the only thing anyone can do out there, which is scream and hammer on the boat and pray it is enough. It was not. In a handful of seconds, the tiger had pulled Anirban off the open mud and back in the mangrove, into a tangle so dense that following was neither possible nor survivable. The boatman screamed and banged on the hull, and I know how useless that sounds, but out there in that mud, it very nearly is the only card anyone holds. Tigers here carry what they take deep into the forest, and the swamp closes behind them almost at once. By local custom, a small flag would later be planted where a person was lost, a jamti, a quiet warning to the next boat that this stretch of bank had already taken someone. Recovery in the Sundarbans is often impossible, and Anirban's case was no different. Wildlife officials logged it as a tiger killing inside the core reserve, where entering on foot is forbidden precisely because of this, and the tiger was never singled out because it had done nothing a Sundarbans tiger does not do in its own kingdom. The tiger was not the monster of the folk songs. It was a wild animal in one of the last places on Earth where it can still be wholly, dangerously wild, and he had stepped onto its bank with his mask turned the wrong way round. That was a forest that hunts from the water. Our next story moves to a wide brown river in southern Africa, and to a swimmer who ignored the one thing the locals never do. It was the 2nd of September, 2019, and a low dry season sun hung over a wide brown river on the edge of southern Africa, where Nile crocodiles as long as a small boat lay unseen in the shallows. Carrie Venter was 26, a South African travel creator who had made her name on wild swimming, dropping into dramatic water in dramatic places. This stretch of river was certainly dramatic, and it was also one of the deadliest, a place where people fetch water and cast nets, and where the river has claimed people repeatedly over the years. The Nile crocodile is the deadliest reptile alive, blamed for hundreds of human deaths a year, and to a big one, a person at the waterline looks no different from any animal that comes down to drink. Many locals there avoid wading beyond their ankles when they can, and they will tell you plainly why. But that caution was exactly the thing Carrion's video was built to break. The swim in the place everyone says you must not. She waded out at golden hour with the camera above the surface, chasing a floating shot as people on the bank called after her. A Nile crocodile can lie with its entire body dead still just beneath the surface, breathing through the tips of its nostrils, reading the ripples and the sound of a person in the water long before that person feels watched. Carrion filming out in the current was, to the animal, simply a large and careless meal that had stopped paying attention. A crocodile does not chase. It waits, sometimes for hours, drifting a little closer with only its eyes above the brown water, and by the time a person feels that something is wrong, the animal has already chosen its moment. I will never understand why you would even consider getting into water that the locals themselves will not even dip a bucket in, but she went in without a second of hesitation. It came from the murk with no warning at all. A sudden explosion of water as the jaws closed, and the sheer weight of the animal pulled her off her feet in an instant. There is no bracing against it. A big one bites down with a force nothing at the waterline can pull free of, and it does not let go. A large Nile crocodile can weigh over half a ton, and the first the bank knew of it was the surge and the spray, and Carrion gone from where she stood. Then came the part the species is built around. The crocodile rolled, spinning over and over, the death roll that drowns and disorients and makes any struggle impossible, and it began to draw her out toward the deeper channel where it could hold her under. Those people on the bank had warned her twice, and then they were the ones left standing there watching it happen, which is a cruelty I would not wish on anybody. They screamed and threw what they had, but no one on that river would follow a crocodile into deep water, because to do so is simply to become the second story. The surface heaved once, and then it smoothed over, and the river went back to looking exactly as calm and as harmless as it had a minute before. Carrion's body was recovered later, downriver, as these cases usually end. It went into the record as a Nile crocodile attack on a swimmer who had entered known crocodile water against local warnings. One more name on a toll the river takes quietly every year. Her camera went into the river with her and was never found, so no footage of the attack has ever surfaced. The crocodile had done nothing strange or savage. It had been lying in its own river, doing precisely what it has done since long before there were people to warn each other, and she had walked out into its front room for a clip. That was a river that gives no warning. Our next story climbs into the cold far east of Russia, to a man who believed the bears there had come to know him. It was the 23rd of June, 2013, and a pale northern light lay over the Kamchatka Peninsula in Russia's far east, a land of volcanoes and salmon rivers and some of the largest brown bears on Earth. Yegor Sanikov, 34, had spent years filming those bears. He was a wildlife videographer of the obsessive kind, camping out through the seasons and following the same animals until he knew them on sight and had a name for every one. He was not careless with it either. He carried a flare and a canister of bear spray on his hip, always within reach. But years of close encounters that ended quietly had worn his caution thin, and he had come to believe he could read these bears better than anyone alive. Kamchatka holds thousands of brown bears, and for most of the year they want nothing to do with people, gorging on salmon and berries and giving humans a wide berth. Predatory attacks are genuinely rare, but rare is not never, and this land has killed careful, experienced people before, the ones who spent years inching a little closer each season until one ordinary morning went differently. In a strong salmon year, a Kamchatka bear barely notices a person nearby, too busy and too full to care. This was not yet a strong year. The rivers were still thin, the bear was running on the last of the previous autumn's fat, and a hungry brown bear does a cold arithmetic that has nothing at all to do with how many quiet mornings a man has sat filming it. A predatory attack like this one is quiet and businesslike, with none of the roaring and bluff of a startled bear defending a cub. That silence is its own warning, and by the time a person reads it correctly, the last of the distance is already gone. The quiet tragedy of the bearmen is always the same. The animal never signed the contract they thought they had, and a wild bear stays a wild bear right up until the day something reminds it what it is. Now, he truly believed that those bears knew him and had come to tolerate him, and honestly, I understand the pull of that, but a wild animal simply does not understand sentiment. The bear that killed him was one he had filmed for weeks, a big male he considered almost irregular. But this was the lean stretch before the salmon run came thick, when the bears are hungry and short of everything, and on that morning Yegor pushed in for a close portrait into the space the bear had always let him have. This time it did not. There was no bluff, no warning huff, none of the theater a bear puts on when it only means to frighten. It simply closed the distance, and against a brown bear at close range, a person has no time and no answer. His spray was on his hip and ready, but a charge launched from that close is over before a hand can even reach it, and the recording ran on a little longer. A brown bear does catastrophic damage in the first second, and everything that followed happened faster than any rescue could reach him, hours from the nearest help. What people find hard to accept about these cases is how little the years of closeness meant in that instant, how completely the animal reverted to what it had always been. People always tell me an animal can tell the good from the bad, but men like Jaeger are exactly the only reason I have never once believed it. When the bear treats a person as prey rather than a threat, it does not leave, and wildlife officials who reached the site later destroyed the bear, judging it posed an unacceptable ongoing danger to people. Yegor's death was ruled a predatory brown bear attack on a photographer who had spent years habituating himself to wild bears at close range, pieced together from the site and the footage that survived on his memory card. That card was kept by the authorities and never made public, and his family have asked that it stay that way. It placed him in a long, sad line of people who loved these animals genuinely, and who died believing that love was returned in a form the bear was never capable of giving. The bear had never been his friend. It had been a wild animal wearing his patience like a loose collar, and one hungry morning it shrugged the whole thing off and became, again, simply a bear. That was a trust that was never really there. Our next story drops into the hill country of Nepal, and to a creator who went out to film the light just as the light was leaving. It was the 15th of November, 2021, and dusk was falling fast over a village in the middle hills of Nepal, where leopards move like smoke along the forest edge the moment the light begins to go. Roshani Gurung, 23, made warm, gentle content about village life, and she had come to a homestay tucked against the forest to film the kind of golden hour footage her followers loved. What she did not fully weigh was where she was. In these hills, leopard attacks on people are recorded regularly, almost always at dusk or after dark, and almost always by taking them from behind and dragging them off into the trees to feed. This is not a rare freak of nature. In one district of western Nepal, a single leopard was blamed for around 15 deaths in 15 months, most of them children. The cats take people who are crouched, bent, or alone at the forest edge, collecting fodder or walking home late, and whole villages live under an unspoken dusk curfew because of it. A leopard is the quietest of all the big cats, small enough to pour itself into a fold of ground and strong enough to drag or even carry a person into a tree. It needs no open space and no running start. It needs a meter of cover and a target facing the wrong way, and the tree line at dusk hands it both in abundance. A leopard almost never lets you see it first. It is built entirely for the ambush, and the usual first sign that one has chosen you is its weight, already landing, already there. I would not walk that forest edge at dusk for any number of views, and the family at that homestay begged her not to go out either. She went anyway, alone, to get the shot as the sun dropped behind the ridge, crouching low at the tree line with the camera raised and her back to the forest. A crouched, low, human shape at the edge of the trees at dusk is very nearly the exact picture a hunting leopard is waiting for. One had been working that edge, and from what the tracks later showed, it came the way they always come, from behind, silent and fast, with no growl and no rush of leaves to give it away. The first anyone at the homestay knew of it was a single short cry from the direction of the trees, and then nothing. The cry the family heard was short because a leopard's method leaves almost no time for anything longer. A single practiced grip at the back of the neck, and then the drag toward cover, the whole thing done in near silence in the last of the light. The family ran out with torches and banging pans, and that noise is genuinely the best weapon they had, which tells me how little anyone really holds against a leopard in the dark. Noise and numbers are sometimes enough to make a leopard drop what it has taken, and the family threw everything they had into the dark. But a leopard moves fast once it has a grip, dragging its prey toward cover, and by the time they reached the tree line, it had already pulled her in among the trees. By the time they carried her back, the light was gone completely, and the forest at their backs had simply closed up again. as though nothing had passed through it at all. They found Roshani at the forest edge. Investigators classified it as a leopard attack on a person who had gone alone to the tree line at dusk against local warning. And after concluding the attacks were likely linked to the same leopard, authorities declared the animal a dangerous man-eater and had it tracked down by a shooter sent by the authorities, as often happens once a leopard has taken a human. The leopard was not evil, and it was not even unusual. It was a hungry predator squeezed by a shrinking forest into the edges of a village, and she had knelt down in its doorway just as it opened for the night. That was a doorway that opens at dusk. Our next story crosses to a river in southern Malawi, and to a man who pitched his camp in the dark on the one path he should have left clear. It was the 6th of October, 2015, and a hot, still dusk was settling over a bend of the Shire River in southern Malawi, where hippos, the weight of a small car, lay half sunk in the shallows, watching the bank. Fraser Grady, 31, made extreme camping and survival videos, and the idea this time was a solo night on a wild African riverbank. No lodge and no guide, just him and a camera and the sound of the water. He pitched his camp on a flat, grassy patch right at the water's edge, close enough that the hippos would be in frame the moment the light came up. They looked like the most harmless things on the river, fat and slow and half asleep, and that misread is often the last one a person makes. The hippopotamus is widely regarded as one of the deadliest large animals in Africa, held responsible for a heavy toll of human deaths every year, though reliable figures are hard to come by. It is fiercely territorial, and for its bulk it can outrun a person over open ground. Its mouth opens wider than almost any animal alive, and it carries tusks longer than a man's hand, enough to bite a wooden canoe cleanly in two. What Fraser had not weighed was where he had put his tent. Hippos spend the day in the water and heave themselves out after dark to graze, following the same worn paths up the bank nightly. And the single most dangerous place a person can be is on one of the paths a hippo uses between river and feeding grounds. His flat, grassy patch was prime grazing ground, and his tent sat squarely across one of those trails. A hippo does not hunt, and it does not want you at all. It wants the grass and the water and to be left alone, and almost every death it causes comes down to a person being, without ever meaning to, directly in its way. People see those round, yawning faces and think of cartoons, and I really need everyone to understand that the wide open yawn is a warning from one of the most dangerous animals in all of Africa. As the last of the light went, the river began to empty. One by one, the hippos hauled their enormous bodies up out of the shallows and started up the bank, dark shapes moving along paths worn over years, and Fraser, thrilled, put his camera and his lamp on them rather than getting himself out of their way. One large hippo came straight up the trail his tent was on and stopped, and for a moment it gave him every warning it had. The head lowered, the huge mouth gaping open, a deep grunting that a person is meant to feel as much as hear. Fraser filmed it, delighted, reading a threat display as the best shot of the night, not the last warning it was. I have watched the footage right up to the point it cuts out, and what really racks my brain is how impossibly fast something that size moves once it has decided, far quicker than I would ever have believed. The animal came up the trail and found the tent and the light blocking the path it walked every night. And a hippo that finds its route suddenly blocked is as dangerous as anything on the continent. It appeared to treat the tent and lamp as obstacles to be driven aside. And on a path that narrow, with an animal that size in it, there was no room and no time to get clear of its line. A hippo does not maul and does not feed. It bites, and it drives its whole weight behind the bite, and the force of that is beyond anything a person can stand against. The jaws and sheer tonnage arriving together in a second or two. Then, the threat gone, and the trail clear again, it simply carried up onto the grass, which seemed to be all it had wanted, and the river slid on exactly as it had a minute before. Fraser was found at first light, and investigators later put it down as a hippo attack on a man who had made his camp directly on a hippo trail, on the path the animals used between river and grazing grounds. He was not the first the Shire had taken this way, though perhaps the first to set a camera rolling for it, and the hippo was never singled out, because it had done nothing unusual for a hippo whose path was blocked. The camera was found in the flattened reeds, but his family and authorities have never let the footage be shown. The hippo had not been a monster, and it had not been hungry for him. It had been a heavy, tired animal set on its nightly path between river and feeding grounds, and he had pitched his tent across the one stretch of ground it would never agree to give up. That was a camp set in the worst possible place on the whole river. For our final story, we go to the palm forests of Indonesia, to a snake big enough to make a grown man disappear, It was the 30th of April, 2016, and a wet heat hung over the palm plantations of Sulawesi in Indonesia, where the longest snake on Earth, the reticulated python, grows heavy enough to take a grown adult whole. Bayu Prasetyo, 27, made jungle adventure videos, and word had reached him of a monster python living out on a plantation, the kind of rumor that becomes a viral clip if you can find the animal. So he went in after dark with a headlamp and a camera, alone, to track down a snake that people who actually knew the land would only have hunted in a group and in daylight. The reticulated python can pass 20 feet and grow as thick as a thigh, and it is a patient ambush constrictor. It is not a fantasy that these snakes take people. Across Indonesia, several villagers have been swallowed whole in recent years, from plantations and gardens on these very islands, found only when someone noticed a snake lying still with a strange, swollen shape to its body. A reticulated python hunts by patience and by sense, reading the dark through heat-sensitive pits, scent, and vibration, lying folded along a branch or a furrow until something warm passes within reach, then striking with a mouthful of back-curved teeth built for holding rather than tearing. The teeth were never the real danger. The danger was the loops of muscle that came with them, faster than the eye could follow. A big constrictor does not strike to poison or to tear. It takes hold, and then it simply waits. And every breath you let out, it keeps tightening by that much more. Patient in a way nothing warm-blooded can match. The clip he was after was the classic one, a man standing beside a monster and living to post it, and he had watched a dozen other creators get exactly that shot. Which is the trouble with that shot, because the ones who get it are the only ones ever around to tell you about it. Going after a snake that long, alone, in the dark for a video is a decision I genuinely cannot even begin to wrap my head around, and yet, he made it anyway. He found it, and it was enormous. And instead of keeping his distance, he moved in for the shot everyone else would be too afraid to get. Close enough to kneel beside it, close enough to make a person the scale beside it. Alone, at night, with no one there to pull it off him. That closeness was the whole mistake in one frame. A python that size strikes and coils in almost the same motion, and once the coils are set around the chest, there is no muscling out of them without help. Each time he breathed out, the snake took the space and drew tighter, so that the next breath was smaller than the last. Alone in the dark, there was no leverage to be had, and no hand free to reach for anything. Every instinct I have was screaming at the screen long before anything happened, and he just kept walking deeper in. The headlamp dropped and lit a patch of leaf litter, and the struggle grew quieter, and then it stopped, and the long, slow, patient work that a python does after the breathing ends went on in the dark with no one to see it. By the time anyone came looking, there was nothing left to interrupt. When searchers followed his last known route, they came upon an unusually swollen python along the way, heavy and slow, the same grim sign that a handful of real cases across Indonesia have turned on, and the truth of what had happened was as plain as it was terrible. It made him one more name on the short, grim list of people these snakes have taken whole in recent years. His phone was recovered near the search, and though the police hold it and his family refused to release it, a short piece is said to circulate quietly among those who collect such things. The python had done only what a python does. It had no notion that he was a person, or a creator, or anything at all beyond a warm shape that had walked, filming, straight into the range of its ambush. Not one of these was simple bad luck. Every one of them walked, waited, dropped, or lay down inside the reach of a predator they had been warned about, chasing a shot that felt, in the moment, worth more than the warning. That is the part that will forever stick with me. That every one of these deaths was preventable, right up to the last second. What I need people to understand is that these animals were not being ruthless or evil. They were only ever being themselves.